So we'll start with John, who to many is the father of the triple bottom line. John has spent more than 3 decades challenging and supporting C-suite executives and their boards to improve their sustainability performance, and he claims we are entering a breakthrough decade, a make or break time. John?
Thank you, Rini. Is this working? It is. My 50,000-year-old brain slightly struggles with the notion of quantum entanglement. And yet, Zina, you gave us an example. So we started yesterday with Vipa Bakshi talking about rape in India. And then you went on to talk about the X Prize of women's safety. And I think, these things are both intimately connected, but for a lot of people are still sort of somewhat unconnected. I'm going to talk about a project which we're working on with the Global Compact and others to try and make those connections for business. And I just wanted to say thank you immensely to Lisa Kingo for backing this project, and to Ingvild Sorensen for starting the journey some time ago when we went to see people like the X Prize Foundation and Singularity University to just get a sense of what was going on in that wider landscape. So I'm going to talk about Project Breakthrough. The theme is sustainable business in exponential time, so a very natural fit with what Zina was just going through. But a question, why am I showing, in a sense, a farmscape? Well, last week I was in Israel. For all its faults, Israel, and sometimes because of its faults, Israel is really piling into advanced technologies. And I went to see a place where they're growing herbs. But they're growing herbs not with hydroponics, which was yesterday's high technology, but with what they call aeroponics. So this is where the roots are fed through air or mist. The interesting thing about that technology, and this is on a rooftop, is that it increases 50-fold the density of plants that you can grow per meter, and it also cuts the water consumption 20-fold. That's just an example. You mentioned again science fiction. My favorite recent science fiction author is William Gibson, often quoted for saying something like, the future's already here, it's just not yet evenly distributed. And I think part of what we're trying to do is to get people out of the C-suite, out of business organizations, and into that strange new world. And when we talk about exponential, we just heard the footsteps almost to the moon, or 25 times around the planet. Everything around us, whether we like it or not, has been going exponential since 1950. These diagrams show very clearly that population growth, GDP, whether you like definitions of GDP or not, and the consumption of a huge range of resources around the world are on exponential trajectories. And that's why scientists increasingly talk about the Anthropocene. For the first time ever, this planet, its future, is being dictated by one species, and that is our own. Now, India, as we've heard at different times during the last sort of day and a half, has demographic potential and potentially demographic issues. And we've also heard that if India gets its act together, you can deliver 50% of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not exactly counting on that, but I think people like Xenia, and unfortunately as yet there aren't that many people like her, but there are a growing number, give me great optimism that India can really come up a trajectory. But I'm going to explain, as we just heard, how those trajectories potentially work. But just before I do that, I grew up in a world where NGOs, activists, campaigners, people like Greenpeace, really set the agenda. And they were basically against business, and they were against often technology, and they wanted to slow things down if they possibly could. We're at a period now where we also see activism, but of a very different sort. And now it's business activism, but it's no longer talking about 1%, or it's great that you've got a 2% CSR tax in India, but they're not even satisfied with 10%. They're talking about tenfold change and upwards. So what does that exactly mean? Well, either you can go to places like the X Prize Foundation in Los Angeles or Singularity University in Mountain View, or over time, I hope that you'll also go to the Global Compact and find a lot of this wisdom there. And just to make a very simple point, The Sustainable Development Goals, many people in business continue to understand, are incremental goals. They're not. If you look just at the first two goals and you think about no or zero by 2030, even by 2050, these are exponential targets, but not enough people yet are seeing them in that sort of way. So one of the things we've been doing with the Global Compact is a series of meetings, convenings. One last November was in Cambridge, in my country, the United Kingdom, co-hosted with Arm Holdings, the chip company, who are increasingly interested in the SDGs. And I think that sort of bridging is crucial here. And the sorts of things that we've been looking at are things like novel business models, disruptive technology, and critically, the exponential mindset. And PA will talk about that in just a second through Shobal Roy. And I was dreading that Xenia would show this diagram. Many of you will have seen it already, but it's just a way, and I think quite an elegant, simple way, of explaining how exponentials work. For a long time, nothing seems to be happening, or indeed, things seem to be almost going backwards. And then there are these moments where inflection points where suddenly everything changes. And part of what we're trying to do at Project Breakthrough is to flit around the world and get a sense of who's doing what against the SDGs, against the COP21 agenda. And just recently, we published a short report with the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, where Lisa Kingo is a commissioner, looking at business models and looking at the characteristics of the business models that increasingly will dominate in this area. And I think most of you are quite good now at thinking about the business case for action. I wonder how many of you as yet understand how to develop and roll out a new business model. That increasingly will be the challenge for people in the sustainability industry, if I can call it that. If you go to Project Breakthrough, the website, which is still in beta, it'll launch formally in September, you will find a range of different examples, case studies. Some of them overlap with the Global Opportunity Explorer platform that you heard of yesterday, but our intent is to stretch well into the future. So it's not just what you can click on and drag in today's world, but how you can look out into the future. And so examples here, one is an India drug company that is reverse engineering other people's drugs. Many pharmaceutical companies don't like that, but it's a way of accessing new types of medicine. And on the right-hand side, we'll hear from Philips Lighting in just a second. Just to conclude, a lot of people are still dismissing the prospects of breakthrough as pretty remote, but just recently, many of you will have seen the stock valuation of Tesla crossed over with that, for the first time, of General Motors, an iconic company of the old industrial order. And I take great comfort from that. Not that the stock prices will stay at that level, but this is an extraordinary time. If you go to the Project Breakthrough website, you'll find a 1-minute video, which I would have shown today, but I hadn't got time, just profiling some of the innovators that we've already talked to. So that's the address. I'll leave you with that. Encourage you to go and take a look. And I look forward very much to what comes next